Today AMD is launching their Threadripper 9000 processors, and as you can see, I've been busy. 4 Threadripper platforms here. This is Ryzen 9, which I'm using as a comparison. And the reason I'm using my Ryzen 9 9950X as a comparison is because it uses Zen 5 technology, as do these two Threadripper 9000s. But not this Threadripper 7000, because that's Zen 4. And this over here, Threadripper 3000, that's Zen 2. And if that sounds even the least bit confusing, I'm going to rattle through a brief Threadripper history lesson, and then we're going to get into these new processors, and we're going to go through some charts. But first I'm going to remove this Lego, which is actually an Epic. And even though it's similar to Threadripper, it's not Threadripper. This might feel like ancient history, but back in 2017 when AMD launched Threadripper 9950X with 16 cores, we were in a world where desktop processors, on the one hand from Intel we had 6-core Coffee Lake, on the other hand from AMD we had 8-core Ryzen 1800X. On the high-end desktop, which was an invention by Intel, we essentially had repurposed baby Xeons. So where they had desktop processors that were 4 cores, they'd sell you a high-end desktop processor with 6 cores. AMD Threadripper changed all that. Where Intel had been charging us $1,000 for 6 cores of high-end desktop and $1,500 for 10 cores of high-end desktop, when Threadripper came out with 16 cores, Intel found themselves forced to unlock the next tier of Xeons, 18 cores for $2,000. This was a monstrous part at the time, hugely expensive, but it was the best processor that you could buy, and you could overclock it. It meant that Intel still ruled the desktop processor market. As you know, that has changed. So let's very briefly rattle through the history of Threadrippers from 2017 to the present day. And I promise you, I'll make this quick. The original Threadripper launched in 2017 on Zen architecture using a 14nm process from GlobalFoundries. The most basic part, the 1900X, had 8 cores, the 1920X had 12 cores, and the 1950X had 16 cores. In essence, we're doubling up the desktop Ryzen processors, but we're adding a load more PCI Express. And of course, AMD's taking the fight to Intel in the workstation market. Pricing quite reasonable, starting at $549, moving up through $799, and for $999 you get 16 cores. In 2018 we saw the Zen Plus Threadripper 2000s. These are a tweaked version of Zen called Zen Plus, so raises clock speeds. And they use a 12nm process from GlobalFoundries. The big changes, we now have X series and WX series, X being 12 and 16 cores, WX 24 and 32 cores. So the X series is double the Ryzen desktop, while the WX workstation series is 4 times Ryzen. In 2019, AMD stepped up a gear with their Zen 2 Threadripper 3000, which uses TSMC 7nm rather than GlobalFoundries 12nm. Top of the heap, we have the 3990X with 64 cores. Then in 2022 we saw the Threadripper 5000, but only WX, no high-end desktop parts. The message from AMD was that they had eclipsed Intel, and these Threadrippers are all about the workstation. The move from Zen 2 to Zen 3 was relatively minor. We still had 64 cores at the top of the stack, and the clock speed had increased slightly from 4.3 GHz to 4.5 GHz. The comparison between Threadripper 5000 WX and Xeon W3300 shows that AMD was holding all the cards in this generation. In 2023, AMD launched Threadripper Pro 7000WX, and there are a number of changes from Zen 3 to Zen 4. The maximum core count jumps from 64 cores to 96 cores, maximum boost clock speeds go up hugely from 4.5 GHz to 5.3 GHz, and we gain PCI Express Gen 5. You can also see in this comparison where the 5000WX series ran at 280 watts, we're now running at 350 watts. 25% extra power for 50% more cores sounds like a good deal. And depending on your choice of motherboard, you have support for either 4-channel or 8-channel memory. In further good news, we also see the return of high-end desktop parts, Threadripper 7000. There are 3 parts. The 7960X has 24 cores, 7970X has 32 cores, and 7980X has 64 cores. And as AMD points out, you could drop a 96-core Pro Threadripper in your TRX 50 motherboard. And we arrive in 2025 with the Zen 5 Threadripper 9000s. And you can see in AMD's comparison chart, the change from Threadripper 7000 to Threadripper 9000 is quite slight, but we saw exactly this with the desktop processors. Clock speeds barely increase, the core count doesn't change, we still have PCI Express Gen 5, we have the same level of cache, but there is an uptick in memory support from DDR5 5200 to DDR5 6400. This is somewhat deceptive as we tested Threadripper 7000 with DDR5 6000 at launch. So in practice, the uptick is from DDR5 6000 to 6400. You can see the socket is unchanged on TR5. We're still using the same chipsets and the same motherboards. TDP is unchanged at 350 watts. Maximum core count is 96 cores, but this is for the WX part rather than the higher desktop parts. The product stack of Pro 9000WX parts is 6 deep, however the bottommost 9945WX is not available at retail. The surprise is the other parts are available at retail, albeit at brutal cost. We fully expected these processors would only be available from OEMs such as HP and Lenovo, but nope, you can buy them yourself and install them in your own workstations. And we move on to Threadripper 9000 high-end desktop, which goes up to 64 cores and has up to 80 lanes of PCI Express Gen 5. There are 3 parts. The 9960X has 24 cores. Pricing is $1,500, which we reckon will be £1,350 including VAT. The 9970X is 32 cores. Price is $2,500. We estimate £2,250 including VAT, and the 9980X with 64 cores is $4,999. We estimate £4,490 including VAT. These are increases in price of about 10% over Threadripper 7000. When we look at the gen over gen comparison between Threadripper 7000X and Threadripper 9000X, we can see the core count is unchanged and the TDP is unchanged. And when you look closely at the frequencies, you'll see the base clock speeds are unchanged and the boosts increase somewhat. For the 24 and 32 core parts, the boost increases from 5.3 to 5.4 GHz. For the 64 core, it increases from 5.1 to 5.4 GHz. And we can see when it comes to features for the WRX90 and TRX50 platforms, the big difference is 8-channel and 4-channel memory support and the number of lanes of PCI Express Gen 5. We can also see to get the maximum support you need a Pro processor, and we've just seen the price of those parts. And while high-end desktop parts on TRX50 aren't exactly cheap, they are certainly more within reach of enthusiast PC builder. When we look at the entire product stack of Threadripper Pro with the 3000s at the bottom and the 9000s at the top, we can see that the 3000 and 5000 generations topped out at 64 cores, while the 7000s and 9000s go up to 96 cores. And we can also see that boost clock speeds have increased over time by about a gigahertz, while base clock speeds have gone up by about 500 megahertz. Looking at the product stack for Threadripper high-end desktop, we go all the way from the 1000 original Zen parts right up to Zen 5 9000s. And here the maximum core count has jumped up from 16 cores to 64 cores. The base clock speeds have also increased slightly, and the boost clock speeds have increased by about 1 gigahertz. On a technical level, the changes in Threadripper over the years are impressive, but another important factor is support from the manufacturers of motherboards such as Gigabyte. If we take this original Threadripper motherboard, which is an X399 Aorus Extreme, you can see it's a large motherboard. Clearly the processor socket is enormous, Threadripper is enormous, we have 8 memory slots, but apart from that, it's desktop hardware just more. Then, when we move over to this new motherboard, the TRX50 AI Top from Gigabyte, and we look at that board, and annoyingly when I hold it the correct way up, note the I/O panel, the processor is upside down. I really hate that. So I'm going to show it to you that way up. And I'm going to show it to you that way up. And I'm going to show it to you like this. The VRM is absolutely epic. It has support for 8 memory modules. But look at this. I flick a single catch. I lift away this entire heatsink. And I expose the active cooling on the chipset and also the M.2 slots. I love that. The quality of this motherboard against this motherboard shows just how much support these manufacturers are throwing behind AMD and Threadripper. Or I suppose if we're being mean about it, it shows how their interest has moved from Intel high-end desktop to AMD Threadripper. And whilst I show you the rear I/O panel of the Gigabyte TRX50 AI top with its dual 10 gigabit Ethernet, let's just touch on one other point, the difference between AMD Zen 4 and Zen 5. We saw with the Ryzen 9000 desktop processors that a change that we hadn't been aware of initially is how the through-silicon vias connect on 3D processors. This change allowed AMD to move the 3D V-cache from on top of the processor cores to underneath, and this helped both performance and cooling. And you have to wonder, Zen 5, Threadripper 9000, might there be a 3D version of these processors? And when you look around inside the BIOS of the Gigabyte TRX50 with Threadripper 9970, you can see there is indeed a setting for 3D V-cache. You can leave it on auto, you can disable it, or you can enable a single stack of 3D V-cache. Clearly this could only apply if a processor actually had 3D V-cache in the first place, but that sounds promising, doesn't it? However, if we look at the same Gigabyte motherboard with the Threadripper 7970X, i.e. the Zen 4 part, you'll see that this feature's actually been present for some years, and it included options for 1, 2 and 4 stacks of 3D V-cache. No doubt AMD has made engineering samples of Threadripper 7000 with 3D V-cache, but to the best of my knowledge they've never seen the light of day. Certainly I've never seen any figures to do with performance for those processors, so I'm going to assume they don't exist, or not in any meaningful sense. It has to be possible that AMD will release a version of Threadripper 9000 with 3D V-cache, but personally, while I'd love to see it, I'm not going to hold my breath. And now, let's show you some of these processors working hard for their living. Let's see how a variety of processors behave in Cinebench R23, starting with Threadripper 9950X, 16 cores, 32 threads running at a sustained 3.4 GHz, processors drawing 180 watts. Then we move on to the Ryzen 9 9950X, also 16 cores and 32 threads, but brand new Zen 5 technology. This processor is running at 4.7 GHz all cores, and it's drawing slightly more power at 200 watts. Our third processor is the Zen 2 Threadripper 3990X. We're jumping up to 64 cores and 128 threads. Clock speed is only 2.95 GHz, and the processor is drawing 287 watts. But just look at all those cores in action. Fourth, we have the Zen 4 Threadripper 7970X, 32 cores, 64 threads, running at a mighty 4.6 GHz and drawing 350 watts. And we arrive at the new processors, Zen 5 Threadripper 9970X, also 32 cores and 64 threads, running slightly slower than the Zen 4 part at 4.55 GHz and still drawing 350 watts. And finally we have the Zen 5 Threadripper 9980X, 64 cores and 128 threads, running at 3.7 GHz and requires 350 watts. And let's see how those figures look in our performance chart for Cinebench R23. And despite appearances, this multicoloured mess does actually have some method. The light blue lines are Zen 5 parts, the purple lines are Zen 4 parts, the red Zen 3, the green are Zen 2, Zen Plus and Zen. The yellow lines are various Intel processors. Top of the chart by a clear margin, it's the Threadripper 9980X. In second place we have the Threadripper 9980X, and you'll note that says Club 386 in the text. And the reason is I lifted that figure from their review of that processor. Kit Guru reviewed the 7970X, however we didn't get our hands on the 7980X, and I trust Club 386 as sound people. In third place we have the Threadripper 9970X, so Zen 5 and 32 cores. In fourth place we have the Threadripper Pro 5995WX, 64 cores of Zen 3 that Luke reviewed absolutely ages ago. Making a competent showing in the middle of the chart we have the Intel Xeon W9 3495X and 3475X that I reviewed a while ago. These are Gen 4 Xeons. Intel is now on Gen 6 Xeons. We did put in a request to Intel for some samples. We didn't hear anything back on that subject. In sixth place we have Threadripper 7970X, and you'll note it says quick run, score just over 64,000. And then 2 places below that we have the same processor, but this time it's a 10-minute run, and there it scores just under 59,000. The difference in those two scores is the boosty behaviour of the 7970X. It boosts very well, and the test is over in a matter of moments. And if you go to the bottom quarter of the chart, you'll see the Ryzen 9 9950X leads the Core Ultra 9 285K by the tiniest of margins, and is also a short head in front of the Core i9 14900K. In other words, desktop processors get absolutely beaten to pieces by these Threadrippers. And right down the bottom of the chart we have the Zen and Zen Plus Threadrippers. It'll be helpful if I give you some clarification about my testing methodology, because in the chart I just showed you, quite a lot of that data was actually historic. I did a Leo Says a while ago about Threadripper when the Threadripper 7000 launched. I did some benchmarking at that time, including on old Threadrippers and other processors, and now of course we've got Zen 5 Threadripper 9000. Certain benchmarks, Cinebench R23 being a prime example, I'm confident I can reuse old data and mix it up with new data, and we're good. We can compare like with like. For other benchmarks, particularly involving graphics or where the memory has changed, oh no, that doesn't work. So the hardware I've used for benchmarking, I have not used this TRX 50 AI top. However, I would dearly like to get around to doing a review of that motherboard. When it comes to Threadripper 7000, Threadripper 9000, I use this motherboard. Gigabyte TRX 50 Aero D. It's sent to me by AMD for this review, and this is a Rev 1.2. This board here, which looks incredibly similar, is a Gigabyte TRX 50 Aero D Rev 1.0, and I was sent that a while ago when I did the Threadripper 7000 tests. So that is basically here for show. I've parked this. I've moved on to the Rev 1.2. And to get some oldie worldy data with the Threadripper 3990X, that's the Zen 2 part, I've used this. Asus ROG Zenith Extreme, which is a TRX 40. So after the X399 chipset we moved on to TRX 40. This board therefore is quite specific to this family of processors. And then the historic data I've got for Threadripper 5000 Pro that Luke got a while ago. Those processors were loaned to Kit Guru and went back as though they were on a piece of elastic to AMD. And as I mentioned when I was walking you through that first chart, I've benchmarked the 7970X Threadripper, but I have not seen the 7980X, so I've taken some figures from Club 386. And we also have the memory to consider. The Ryzen 9 9950X uses G-Skill Trident Z5 Neo, it's dual channel DDR5 6000. Threadripper 3990X is DDR4 3200, that's G-Skill FlareX. This Kingston Fury Renegade Pro DDR5 6000 is what I used when I did Threadripper 7000. I've done some benchmarking with this again, and also this G-Skill T5 Neo, which is DDR5 6400. This is supported by Threadripper 9000, so I've benchmarked the 32-core 9970X with both 6000 and 6400, and also the 64-core 9980X with the 6400 memory. And naturally I'll be highlighting those points in the test data as we go through them. So now let's get back to the charts. Cinebench R23 single core. It's quite remarkable how all the coloured bands have grouped together. Right up the top of the chart we have Core Ultra 9285K and i9 14900K, and after that we have the Zen 5 parts led by Ryzen 9, then the two new Threadrippers. After that Zen 4 Threadrippers, then we have the two Intel Xeons, after that the three red bands, a Threadripper Pro 5000 series, and the bottom three are Zen 2, Zen Plus and Original Zen. Cinebench R23 multi-core points per watt. We take the score in Cinebench R23 multi-core, we divide by the watts required for the processor. In other words, it's a measure of efficiency. And right at the top of the chart we have the brand new 64-core 9980X. A distance behind that we have the Zen 4 7980X, the figure from Club 386. Then we have the 64-core Threadripper Pro 5995WX. And behind that we have the 64-core 3990X. The point here is the 64-core parts use the best silicon, the most efficient silicon. So we're going down the 64-core parts in order of generation: Zen 5, Zen 4, Zen 3 and Zen 2. The two blue bands after that are the Zen 5 32-core Threadripper and then the 16-core Ryzen 9. Blender Classroom. At the top of the chart we have the 64-core Threadripper 9980X, and then behind that we have the Zen 3 Threadripper Pro 5995WX. We don't have a figure from Club 386 for their Zen 4 64-core part, but I'm confident it will sit between the two of these. Third on the test we have the Threadripper 9970X, despite the fact it's a mere 32 cores, and that beats out the Xeon W9 3495X, which is 56 cores. The difference is that the Threadripper with 32 cores is running at 4.6 GHz, where the Xeon's running at 2.9 GHz. It's interesting to note that the 9970X is running slightly slower than the Threadripper 7970X, which is behind it. This indicates the new Zen 5 architecture does indeed have better IPC than the Zen 4 7970X. It's also interesting to go right to the bottom of the chart where we have the Ryzen 9, the Core Ultra 9 and the i9 14900K to see how far behind those parts trail. They're decent processors, but in terms of pure grunt, they lose out to these workstation chips every day of the week. In Handbrake Conversion, we're taking a 1440p file in H.264 and converting it to 1080p in H.264. At the top of the chart, it's the 32-core Threadripper 9970X running on DDR5 6400. Behind that, we have the Threadripper 9980X, double the cores but slower clock speed, very close behind. And then behind that the Threadripper 9970X running on DDR5 6000. It's interesting to note that the Threadripper 7970X, the Zen 4 part, is in fourth and making a decent showing, but we can clearly see here that Zen 5 has better IPC than Zen 4. In our second Handbrake conversion test we're taking a 4K file in H.264 and converting it to 1080p using H.265. The processor at the top of the chart here is the Ryzen 9 9950X. High clock speed wins the day. Behind that we have the Threadripper 9970X with DDR5 6400, and on almost exactly the same FPS figure it's the 9970X running on DDR5 6000. What we're seeing in this test is that higher clock speed works better than more cores, so the 64-core Threadripper 9980X is in fourth place behind the 32-core and the 16-core models. Once again you can see the coloured bands are grouped together by family, so at the top we have Zen 5, then Zen 4, then Zen 3, then Intel, and then Zen 2. 7-zip decompressing benchmark. There are some slightly curious figures here, but effectively at the top of the chart we have the Zen 4 and Zen 5 Threadrippers all tied together. After that we have the 32-core Zen 3 Threadripper Pro, the 56-core Xeon, and then we have the 64-core Threadripper Pro. Presumably that's down to clock speed because the 64-core runs much slower than the 32-core. And then very strangely we have the green bar for the 64-core Threadripper 3990X, which is only just ahead of the 24-core Threadripper Pro 5965WX. 7-zip compressing benchmark, it's a similar story. Top of the chart, the Zen 4 and Zen 5 Threadrippers more or less tie, but the very top of the chart is the 32-core 9970X. After that we have the 56-core Xeon, followed by the 64-core Threadripper Pro Zen 3 part. And then after that the figures cascade down more or less by generation. AIDA 64 memory bandwidth. This is of course mainly a test of the memory itself rather than the platform or the processor. Top of the chart it's the Threadripper 9980X running on DDR5 RDIMM 6400. And effectively tied behind that, it's the Threadripper 9970X on the same memory. We've taken the figure from Club 386 for the Threadripper 7980X on much the same memory, and it's effectively a dead heat. It's a step down to the 9970X running on DDR5 6000, just as you'd expect, and also to the Zen 4 7970X on DDR5 6000. It's interesting to see that 8-channel DDR4 does very well in the places behind that. Then we get Intel, then we get some desktop processors, and then we get old Threadrippers. To mix things up, I ran a new test. I used Adobe Premiere to export one of my own project files. This is an 8-minute video and I'm exporting it in 4K 60 using H.265. Threadripper 9980X and 9970X tied exactly on 226 seconds. The Zen 4 Threadripper 7970X was only a few seconds behind that at 231 seconds, and it was a step back to the Ryzen 9 9950X, which only has 16 cores and draws half the power approximately, but did a very good job. Trailing far in the distance we have the Threadripper 3990X. Despite its 64 cores, the clock speed is quite low, and it was far and away the slowest of the 5 processors. And we have some gaming benchmarks using RTX 5080 graphics. Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy at 1440p. Top of the chart it's the Ryzen 9 9950X, just as you'd expect. And in second and third places we have the Threadripper 9970X, first with DDR5 6400 and then with DDR5 6000. You might think I have these the wrong way round, but look at the 1% lows. The faster memory really helps here. In fourth place we have the Zen 4 7970X, and in fifth it's the 64-core 9980X. Way down at the bottom of the chart we have the Threadripper 3990X. It's got 64 cores, but there's not much else you can say in its favour. In case you're wondering, the power figures in the brackets, 370 watts, 460 watts, etc. Those are system power draw figures. Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy at 1080p. In first place it's a clear win for the Ryzen 9 9950X. Then in second and third place Threadripper 9970X with the 2 speeds of memory, and this time if anything it's the DDR5 6000 that wins, but effectively it's a dead heat. A distance back we have the 32-core Zen 4 7970X, and then a further distance back it's the 64-core 9980X. Trailing way down the bottom of the chart it's the 3990X. Far Cry 6 at 1440p. Top of the chart once again, Ryzen 9 9950X. And then we have some separation for the 2 figures for the 9970X with different memory. Faster memory certainly seems to work here. After that we have the Zen 5 9980X and then the Zen 4 7970X. In last place by a huge distance it's the Threadripper 3990X. Far Cry 6 at 1080p, top of the chart, Ryzen 9 9950X, and then the Threadripper 9970X, and it's a dead heat between the 2 speeds of memory. After that it's the 64-core 9980X, and it's quite a distance behind. A further distance behind it's the Zen 4 7970X, and way down the bottom, once again, Threadripper 3990X. Before I get to my conclusions in these reviews, I'm just going to point out a couple of other bits of hardware I used. Power supply, Seasonic Vertex, it's gold, it's 1200 watts. You'll note that's not even the latest spec of ATX. It worked absolutely fine throughout the testing, and that was despite the fact it was powering this Palette Game Rock Gaming OC graphics card, RTX 5080. I wouldn't have been shocked if the system had tripped out at some point, but it was absolutely fine at all times. In other words, the test systems with this mighty motherboard was running like a big PC. CPU cooler was sent to us by AMD with the review kit, Silverstone XE360 TR5. I think we saw this cooler at Computex. So it's a 360 AIO with some chunky 120mm fans. And look, the cold plate TR5 gives the clue. It is specific to Threadripper. The ambient recently has been in the low 20s and the CPU temperature would typically be high 70s or low 80s, which is absolutely fine, and that's with the fans running at a steady 60%. Nice and quiet. As I say, the test system, really it was just a big PC. It was nothing too urgent and horrible. But of course it's drawing quite a lot of power from the wall socket and it's generating quite a lot of heat. So let's get to my pros and my cons. We have two reviews here, but I'm kind of lumping them together. So we have the 32-core Threadripper 9970X and we have the 64-core Threadripper 9980X. And to remind you, we have dollar pricing. We don't have confirmed UK pricing at the second, but the 32-core I believe is going to be about £2,250 including VAT, and the 64-core about £4,490 including VAT. They're not cheap. It's pros, the good points: excellent performance and immaculate behaviour. I didn't have any blue screens, I didn't have any lockups, I had no nasties. I mean, I didn't try overclocking, but they just ran. They were easy to cool at 80 degrees C despite the 350 watts of power draw for the CPU. And we had good motherboard and driver support. As I say, immaculate behaviour. I'm sure it helped that this G-Skill memory was sent by AMD and was included in the review kit. It just worked out of the box. Negatives, the cons: high system cost. I don't just mean the processor, I mean you need to factor in about £750 for a decent motherboard, and I believe this AI top from Gigabyte is more like £1,000. We're talking expensive hardware. In addition, you need a graphics card. As we know, desktop gaming graphics cards these days not cheap, and pro graphics cards are very, very expensive. Also, the memory. This 128GB kit's about £1,000. The 64 gig 4DIMM kit will cost you about £500. Obviously, you've got storage, power supply, case and cooling. I mean, there's something to be considered. You're going to be spending £7,000 on a workstation. Clearly you could push the boat further than that. We're talking high system cost. In addition, I would say the performance is dependent on the software you're using. You saw in some of those benchmarks I was running that essentially they just hit a plateau. It didn't matter which processor was running at a certain point, they didn't get any faster. And finally, the high power draw makes air conditioning a necessity in my opinion. Now, I know to Americans, for example, that's a laughable statement. You've already got it. We Brits don't use air conditioning. So if you're in high summer and you don't have the infrastructure to support this system, I think you'll suffer. And to the awards, Threadripper 9970X just scrapes a worth buying, and the Threadripper 9980X gets a worth considering. Do please check us out at kitguru.net on the web, and we're on TikTok.